Here we are, episode 4, That 70s Pod. We hope everybody had a good Labor Day weekend, and we're going to jump right back into 1975. We're starting right here, right now, and we are talking about, you know him as John Denver, but out of curiosity, guest of honor today, Brian, what was John Denver's birth given name? I can't pronounce this.
Thank you, Andrew, and good day to you. John Denver's real name, his given name, as you say, was Henry John Dutchendorf, and Henry wasn't a really good stage name, so he went with his middle name of John, and obviously he had to ditch Dutchendorf as a last name because that's not going to fit on an album cover very well. And so his affection for Colorado, the state of Colorado, and skiing, led him to the last name of Denver, and that's how John Denver came up with his name.
So John Denver, as most people know, is some people say folk, some people say country. He's a country singer. He's a really big deal in the 70s, 80s, early 90s. I was always told by you growing up, you either love him or you hate him. There's really no in between of like John Denver fans. And he's most known for as the song Take Me Home Country Roads, where you hear in commercials, movies all the time. But this is about the 70s. And today we're talking about 1975. Take the wheel. 1975, John Denver. What do you remember? Were you a fan of him before 1975? What's going on?
Actually, I wasn't, Andrew. I was a young lad at the time. I played guitar. My dad bought me a guitar when I was 7 years old, which would have been 1969. And my dad wanted me to be a country music star. So the first songs that I used to play on a guitar and sing were basically of country music stars of that time, like Charlie Pride, Merle Haggard, and the like. And John Denver was not really a bona fide country music star. As you mentioned, he kind of came out of the folk music circles in the Chad Mitchell trio in the 60s. And he became a solo artist by the late 60s. And of course, his breakthrough song, as you mentioned, was Take Me Home Country Roads. And everybody knew that song. They played it on country radio, and it was a crossover hit. It showed up on the pop charts as well. But it wasn't until 1974 when he released an album called Back Home Again, where he had such songs as Annie's Song, Sweet Surrender, Thank God I'm a Country Boy. These are all songs that people know and love. And John Denver basically, even though he didn't want to be a country music star, he was showing up on the country charts, but he was also showing up on the pop charts. And then in 1975, he released that wonderful album, An Evening with John Denver, that sold millions of copies. It was a 2 album set, and it had all the songs that people had known from him from his early days in the late 60s right up until 1975. And it was a great album. And I'll get in more into the story of how I got turned on to John Denver in just a moment. But the interesting thing is John Denver wanted to be known as a pop singer. He didn't want to be known as a country singer. But in 1975, the Country Music Association nominated him for, and he won Entertainer of the Year, which was certainly unexpected. John Denver wasn't even there to accept the award. He was watching on closed circuit television because he was in Canada, I think, doing a tour at the time. And Charlie Rich, who was a country music star and the 1974 Entertainer of the Year, was the one who announced that John Denver was the winner. And a lot of country music folk didn't like the fact that John Denver won this award, including Charlie Rich, who burned the ballot after, well, he opened it up, he burned the ballot, and then he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, my good friend and the new entertainer of the year is John Denver, and it created a huge stir. It wrecked Charlie Rich's career, but John Denver never looked back. He was never worried about being a country music star, and he went on to be a huge pop star, which is what he wanted.
So specifically talking about an evening with John Denver, did that also aired like on TV, right? Because wasn't there also an Emmy award that he won for that same album?
Well, he whenever John Denver put out an album, he must have had a TV deal. I didn't look that up before doing this broadcast, Andrew, but whenever John Denver put out an album, whether it was 74, 75, 76, on through till the end of the decade, he always had a TV special to promote the album. So I think the Emmy that you're referring to was for one of his TV specials, not necessarily for a concert special. I don't really recall John Denver doing any live concerts on TV. He may have, but I don't remember that.
I was just curious because, like, doing a little bit of research just to see what happened in 1975, it just says his in live concert special, Evening with John Denver, won the 1974 1975 Emmy Award for Outstanding Special slash Comedy Variety of Music. Not sure what about that is 100% true. Um, I just found out on Wikipedia. Like, Wikipedia is hit or miss sometimes. But jumping right into 1975, some of the songs you mentioned, I'm aware of, like Annie's song, "Sunshine on My Shoulders," "Think I'm a Country Boy," and "I'm Sorry" were all like number one hits in the chart. So yeah, like four number one hits. As you mentioned, I guess I'm a country singer. Do you remember seeing this on TV? Do you hear these songs on the radio? Was it playing at school, a restaurant, grocery store? Like, what made you think like, oh, what's that sound? Or like, who is that? Okay, it's this guy named John Denver. I like him.
Well, the song "Take Me Home, Country Roads," which was released sometime around 1970, I think, that was on country radio. So my dad always had country radio on because, again, he wanted me to be a country music star, and so we heard country roads on country radio, but we really didn't know anything about John Denver. We liked the song, but it wasn't until "Thank God I'm a Country Boy" came out as a single, and I'm not talking about the studio version of that song. When the album "An Evening with John Denver" was released, the single that came off of that album was the live version of "Thank God I'm a Country Boy," and everybody has heard that song on the radio. I don't think there's many people that have heard the studio version of that song. It's kind of like "Rock and Roll All Night" by Kiss. No one ever hears the studio version of that song. They always hear the live version of that song from a live one. And kind of the same thing with the "Thank God I'm a Country Boy" with John Denver is every time you hear it on the radio, it's the live version. So everybody, I mean, that was a number one hit. Everybody heard it, and people became way more familiar with John Denver because of "Thank God I'm a Country Boy," and from there, his popularity just grew and grew and grew.
So sidetrack, do you like the live version better?
Oh, absolutely. I like crowd interaction, no matter what it is, whether it's sports, movies, music. Um, I mean, studio versions of songs is fine, but I can't wait to hear a live recorded album or just live in general. If I go to a concert, I love the fan interaction, people singing along, clapping, cheering, whatever the case may be. I've always loved crowd interaction with songs, and I've always loved live albums. I can remember back in the '70s buying live albums, no matter who it was. The Rolling Stones, Charlie Pride, I mentioned earlier. Rod Stewart. I mean, live albums are fun to listen to because there's much more energy behind it.
I was just gonna say sometimes like you can't even I don't think you'll ever hear Rod Stewart's "Want You to Want Me" studio version ever, like on the radio. It's just like it's not gonna be played. It's almost taboo to hear certain songs studio version wise. And that's a good point. John Denver, whenever I do hear that, it's not often. But it's always the live version, greatest hits CD, whatever. It's always the live version. So that plays. I did have a curiosity question. What was it? Oh, when your dad wants you to be a country star or a country singer, did he ever say you're gonna learn guitar, you're gonna do this, so you can be the next so and so? Did he ever throw a name out there that he wanted you to pattern your playing off of?
Well, like I said initially, when I first started playing guitar in 1969, 1970, I was playing a lot of Charlie Pride music, and my dad really liked him. Um, he liked the fact that I did songs and I played them exactly like they were supposed to be played. I didn't try to ad lib them and put my own twist on them, and and that's what my dad liked. But by the time 1975 rolled around, I was kind of experimenting with different stuff. I mean, I was still playing country music, but I wanted to get more into things that were maybe a little bit more difficult to play. Instead of a G chord and a C chord and a D chord, you know, I wanted to get more into a different style, and John Denver's music definitely lend itself well to that.
That is my next question. And then we'll get back on track. What's the first John Denver song that you're like, I think I can do this. I'm gonna start playing it. Was it a song from 1975?
No, actually, it was Country Roads, and Country Roads wasn't a difficult song to play. Um, it was a little bit different in its structure, Andrew, because it um, most country music songs during that time would just have three chords, you know, like a G, a C, a D. And Take Me Home Country Roads had, I want to say, like five or six different chords in the song. So it was more variety. It was something a little bit different. And it was basically um, only the beginning of what John Denver could do with his songs. And the way he played that, and I'll be getting into that a little bit later. But the reason I got into John Denver is because I had a best friend, Andrew, at the time. His name was Don Linscheid, and he lived six houses down the alley from where I lived in St. Paul, and he came rushing over to my house one afternoon, and he said, "Do you like John Denver?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I know a couple of songs. I mean, it's okay." And he said, "I just recorded his this concert off the radio, and oh, you got to listen to it." So I came down to his house, and he had this cool hi-fi stuff, Andrew. He had his speakers and a receiver, and he recorded it on a cassette tape. And I listened to a couple of songs, and he played "Thank God I'm a Country Boy" because I knew that one, and the quality was really good. It was actually better than the album that came out, "An Evening with John Denver," and I think this was live from Radisson Park or Gradison Park. I don't remember what it was called now, but it was so phenomenal to hear this high quality and the crowd cheering and yelling and screaming. And a couple of days later, after thinking about it, I say, "Hey, can you lend me that tape? I just want to listen to the whole thing." And so my buddy Don Linscheid, instead of just bringing me the cassette tape, Andrew, he brought all his hi-fi equipment down to my house, his speakers, his receivers, you know, and he showed me how to hook it all up. And I said, you didn't have to do that. I just wanted the cassette tape because I had a portable cassette player, you know, that I could pop the tape into and listen to it. And he said, "No, no, no, you're going to listen to this tape. It's going to be high quality. I want you to get, you know, the utmost value out of this and hear the best quality of this tape." So I said, "All right," and he let me keep it in my bedroom in my house in St. Paul for like a week. And I listened to it and listened to it and listened to it, and I wanted I just wanted to start learning more about John Denver and how to play his music.
How did he get that live recording?
It was he taped it live off of a radio station that aired one of John Denver's concerts. And, you know, I couldn't tell you, Andrew, what radio station it was. I don't remember who played. that sort of music at the time, back in the mid '70s. But it was 1975 when I first got tuned into and I guess fell in love with the music of John Denver. And it was just a race from there to get my hand on songbooks and figure out how to play his music.
I was gonna ask you that. You were talking about, listening stuff playing on guitar. Could you just hear it and listen to it, or would you have to read sheet music?
Well, I wasn't good enough at the time, Andrew, to just start or just pick up a guitar and figure out how to play songs, especially a John Denver song that had so many chord changes, and he did a lot with riffs, and he used capos, which I didn't even know what that meant at the time. So no, I finally got my hands on a John Denver songbook, and it was a simple songbook that just had the chords, and from there I could kind of figure out what he was doing, just by uh, trying to play the music, listening to the music on an album, and and just going from there. And there were a lot of songs that I just liked playing because they were easy. Country Roads was an easy song to play. Sunshine on My Shoulders is an easy song to play. Um, so I kind of gravitated towards the easy songs, Andrew, until I got a little bit more experience and could play some of his more difficult stuff.
Where would you buy sheet music back when?
Well, music stores were more of a thing in the '70s. Um, you could walk into a guitar store or any store that sold instruments, whether it be guitars, drums, organs, keyboards, that sort of thing, and they would usually have a section where they would have sheet music or songbooks. Also, at any record store back in the '70s, Andrew, record stores would have tons and tons of albums, of course, and the little 45 singles. And they would also have a section of songbooks and sheet music as well. So it was pretty easy to locate that stuff back in the '70s.
And you said something earlier. Oh yeah, so we back to 1975. You do all your research. Your friend Don gives you this, and then you realize, oh, there's a concert. There's you. You didn't see the TV special, right?
I did not see the TV special. I I have seen many of John Denver's TV specials since that time, but the one that you're referring to, no, I have not seen that.
So we're talking about 1975. He won Entertainer of the Year. What else about John Denver that he did in his career and that affected your life that you remember? You were in high school at the time, correct?
Well, 1975, I wasn't quite in high school yet. I would have been
Like middle school,
probably, well, in the '70s, they didn't call it middle school; they called it junior high.
junior high.
Um, so I was probably an eighth grader at the time,
Okay.
is I'm guessing. Um, so I was 12, 13 years old. I'm playing John Denver music, and and that was my introduction. I mean, I was so excited to have, like I mentioned earlier, I was playing classic country. I was playing Charlie Pride and Merle Haggard, and I would get back into like the old Hank Williams songs. I was playing whatever my dad really liked. Because I felt an obligation to him because he bought me a guitar and paid for me to have guitar lessons. So I played what he wanted me to play. But by the time I had been doing it 5 or 6 years, I wanted to do something different, and he didn't really have a problem with me putzing around with John Denver music as long as I was still playing the classic country music that he loved as well. And plus, he didn't have a problem with John Denver because he liked country roads. He liked Thank God I'm a Country Boy. So that part of it was okay.
Was there other people in high school also listening to John or sorry, middle school, listening to John Denver? Was that not really a thing to be a country fan? I know in the Midwest it's not as foreign. to some people, but did you have friends there where other people singing or humming the song in class?
Well, again, it's junior high, not middle school, from the 70s.
Same thing.
Uh, yeah, it's the same thing, but I like junior high. It sounds better.
Mhm.
Um, to answer your question, well, my best friend Don Lynchide, he was my age. He listened to and liked John Denver. Um, he was also a drummer, so he and I were a two-piece band for a while, and we played a lot of John Denver. We also played a few rock songs as well. Um, and People in general would not admit to being a John Denver fan, and I think it goes back to that
Ick.
stigma, that country music was associated with John Denver. So people didn't, they wanted to be associated with Elton John and Kiss and Deep Purple and some of the groups at the time in the mid '70s that played heavy metal music.
Mhm.
So John Denver wasn't, I mean, it wasn't that my friends had anything against John Denver. It's, and I think everyone, even, I can remember one kid, he had a big old cowboy hat on and he stood up one day and said, "Thank God I'm a country boy," and waved his hat. And, he liked rock music, but, he saluted John Denver by doing that.
So John Denver comes out with this album, Evening with John Denver. Other than it being live, what is the significance of this that made it such a big deal that everybody had to get like it was like hands on? Was it just because it was the first version of like a greatest hits of his? Like why is this such a big album?
Well, that's exactly it, Andrew. You answered your own question. At the time, John Denver had, I don't think anyway, he had put out a greatest hits album. He may have, but it was stuff that was real early in his career that people weren't as familiar with, like Poems and Prayers and Promises and Leaving on a Jet Plane and Follow Me. Even though those are great songs, they were more considered folk music. And so when by the time he put out Back Home Again in 1974, and Back Home Again is a really great song. Again, people associated with a country music song, but it's a really great song. And there's so many great songs on that album. As we mentioned, Annie's song is still prevalent today. People are still using Annie's song in weddings, if you can believe that. It was recorded in 1974, and almost 50 years later, people are still using Annie's song in weddings. I mean, that's how incredible that album was. And so when the live album came out in '75, you're absolutely right, Andrew. It was kind of like a whole new audience, a whole new fan base was into John Denver, and this was like a greatest hits album of all of his great hits performed live from in California, I think is where that album was recorded by
Mhm.
RCA. And yeah, it was just fun, from start to finish. That album was just fun.
And like it so was Calypso on that album? Because I know that also came out around that same time.
Well, Calypso, and you mentioned earlier, I'm sorry. After the all the hoopla around An Evening with John Denver died down, John Denver went back into the studio, and the next album he released in 1976 was called Windsong. And on that album was what you just talked about. I'm sorry. Um, Calypso was on that album. And what song did you mention? Uh,
Uh Thank God I'm a Country Boy?
No, well, anyway, the Windsong album had that's probably one of my favorite John Denver albums. It just had so many great hits. Spirit was on that album. Fly Away with Olivia Newton-John was on that album. So he was branching into a whole new audience after that, Andrew. We're talking '76, '77. He was everything that was released as a single shot right to number one on the pop charts And the country music fans by this point had kind of disassociated themselves with John Denver because they realized he wasn't really country music. It's not like they didn't like the guy or anything. He was very affable. I mean, people liked him, but he was more into mainstream pop and the Hollywood thing. He made a movie in 1977 with George Burns called "Oh God," and John Denver just his career really took off after 1975's "An Evening with John Denver."
And nowhere to our audience, we're throwing a lot of words around. But "An Evening with John Denver" and "Windsong" were two separate albums that came out in 1975. In my opinion, every band, every artist kind of has a year where rather they have hit songs, like rather they have more than one album, it just really skyrockets. For example, we are in the future going to do, I'm surprising you right now, in the future, we're going to do a Destroyer album episode. And like, because for that reason, like when that came out, that year stands so much to everybody. Like that was like their peak year. That was their prime year, Kiss, that is. And so 1975, you see this album cover, you see John Denver. What do you think? What does everybody else think of like the shoulder, like the appearance, the shoulder hair, like blonde hair, the granny glasses, like embroidered shirts, like are people just so taken away by his voice that that's all that
Well,
mattered back then?
I'm assuming you're describing the album cover.
A little bit of
Uh,
both, yeah.
yeah, and the thing you didn't mention was the big smile on his face, um, with the granny glasses, with the long blonde hair. Um, it looked like whenever you saw a picture of John Denver performing, it looked like he was just having a great time,
Mhm.
and that was something that really drew me. It really touched me, Andrew, because I wanted to be that kind of performer. I wanted to reach out to people. I wanted to be like that. I wanted to enjoy what I was doing, and it looked like John Denver was just having so much fun, playing his songs, singing his songs, performing for people. And years later, I found out that, he was kind of a depressed person unless he was on stage. He absolutely lived for performing and being in front of 15, 16,000 people a night, and he was selling out arenas, and this went on for years and years and years. And how can you not be touched by that? I mean, that's it's just infectious, and you love that sort of thing. And and so, yeah, I wanted to be the next John Denver, after learning his music. And I eventually went out and bought a songbook, for that correlated with An Evening with John Denver. So I could play every single song on the album, and it was a more detailed songbook than the first one I bought. So it kind of, I mentioned earlier the word capo, which is this thing that you strap on the neck of the guitar, on the first fret or the second fret or the third fret, and you play, you play the same chords, but it winds up putting the song in a different key. And so I had to go and buy a capo. I just bought a cheap one for like a buck or two. Eventually ripped. I used it so much, but I wanted to learn how to play like John Denver too. Not and I tried to sing like him, even though my voice is way different than his. John Denver has a real smooth singing style, and it's really hard to emulate him. I've never heard anybody, since John Denver, sing like he does. And I can't think of one person, no matter if it's in country, pop, rock, whatever, that sang like John Denver sang. And it was definitely one of a kind, and very hard to emulate as well. Although I tried.
That is an
So
interesting point you bring up because it's not like he sings loud, but he's not like over the top loud, like passion, like Michael Bolton. Like no one sounds like a Michael Bolton. But like for John Denver, you're right, very smooth, but loud at the same time in a good way. I'm looking at a picture. I'm gonna describe this the best I can because like this is a podcast. And An Evening with John Denver, you can tell this is live. Most live studio or live albums, it's like a studio picture. For example, you brought up Kiss Alive back when like they planted that picture. But you see the spotlight behind him. You see kind of sweat on his face. His glasses are shining with the spotlights on him. His hand is a little bit blurry. It's an underneath shot of him having a guitar, and you can tell like he's smiling. Like that's a really good live picture. And even look at the Winson album too. Looks like he has a horse behind him. It just kind of symbolizes like everything of like how he's wearing, how he's looking, how he's smiling. Do you have a favorite song on that album? If I'm
On
sorry if I'm sorry if
on
I asked
which one?
this. An Evening with John Denver.
Well, you know, I like several songs. Annie's song, absolutely wonderful. Although I much preferred the version that my best friend Don Lynchide brought me to my house with his hi-fi equipment. Annie's song was on that cassette, and it was absolutely phenomenal. It's good on the album version as well, and the studio version of that song is really good too. I think Annie's song over the years has just been one of my favorite John Denver songs. Certainly top five. It was good on the live album. Um, Thank God I'm a country boy, obviously, and of course one song we haven't even talked about yet, Andrew, that people associate with John Denver, of course, is Rocky Mountain High, which was super wonderful at the live album. You know the way he can hit those high notes, just just a phenomenal album from start to finish.
I never knew that he had Rocky Mountain High, and he also had a song called Rocky Mountain Sweet. I never knew that before. But looking at this playlist, was that kind of unheard of back then that there was 26 tracks on the cassette, or does that just kind of make sense because it was a live like album?
Well, yes and no. I mean, usually live albums are edited down. Record companies didn't like to put out live albums, Andrew, in the 70s, because they just felt like it was it was something you do when you don't know what else to do with an artist, um, and it's just kind of a death sentence is how it was viewed back in the 70s.
Do they feel like they're taken away from like the experience of like, no, 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 we can't record a live album because we want people to go pay a ticket to go see it live. We don't want to just give it to them.
Well, that's part of it. Plus, a live album doesn't really present any new material.
Hmm.
So, you know, when you're putting out albums, especially in the 70s, the 50s, 60s, 70s, you know, all through that those decades, you want to get people to buy the album to listen to the new material. You don't really want to throw a greatest hits album out there or a live album because record producers just kind of felt like it didn't sell. So to do a live album was like I said, a little bit of a death sentence. Um, and if we're going to do an episode about Kiss down the road, you know, we can talk more about that. How they didn't really want to do a live one, but they didn't really know what else to do at the time. But we'll save that topic for when we're talking about Kiss. So live albums just weren't considered a go-to. But in this case, they did it, and it turned out really well and sold many, many, many copies. I think it went platinum, and it was just a good thing to do. And if nothing else, it launched John Denver into a whole new different fandom. And by the time he put out his ensuing albums, you know, Spirit and Calypso and Windsong and I Want to Live, you know, the albums that came out after 1975. I mean, that guy was just riding high. He could do no wrong.
So winding down here, is there any other things about John Denver in 1975 that you like to throw in, or any memories or something you want to say here?
Well, John Denver just he always meant a lot to me going forward. His music, especially his the music after 1975, some of the songs we've already talked about in off the Windsong album, the I Want to Live album. Um, I learned how to play all those songs, and life got a little tough for me in the late 70s, 77, 78. So I leaned on John Denver's music quite a bit to get me through some hard times. Moving to a new school, moving to a new state. We moved to Wisconsin in '76, and I had to start, my freshman year in high school, and not knowing anybody, and that was tough. And John Denver's music, Andrew, got me through that. Listening to it, playing it, got me through a lot of rough times.
So you're a John Denver fan, means a lot to you. Just out of curiosity, random question. Is that movie they made on John Denver's life? Do you think they did his 1975 years justice in that movie?
Well, I think you're talking about the made-for-TV movie that they did somewhere in the 2000s. Um, I think Chad Lowe played John Denver,
Yeah.
if that's the one you're talking about. And one of the gals from Sex and the City played his wife Annie.
Oh, that's right.
Um,
Yeah.
um, uh, that's hard to say because that's kind of when I started to find out how messed up John Denver really was in real life, and that he only seemed like a normal guy when he was on stage, but he had a lot of personal problems. Had some issues with anger and stuff, and if that's the way it was, well, then so be it. But the John Denver that I choose to remember is the one that played wonderful music and got me through some hard times, and the music I fell in love with and learned to play and sing, and that's the John Denver I want to remember, Andy.
Well, that's good, and I'm glad you remember it. I'm glad it brings a fond memory. Like all these episodes that we do here, we were in 1975. Next week, we don't know. So again, you can find that show or this show, that 70s pod on SoundCloud, on YouTube. Just type in that 70s pod and you see all three episodes that popped up. Today we did music. Not sure what we're doing next week. Any final words you want to say today for us, Brian?
Well, this was a nice change, Andrew, because we did a movie about boxing. We talked baseball. We talked about a football toy. So a little different this time around, but it was a lot of fun talking about music and guitars and John Denver. See you guys next week. Peace. My friend.
Some people find it difficult to share their experiences with faith, talk about Jesus, or preach the gospel. Trust me, Drew has been there. And Drew created God the Father apparel, so he figured that Christian clothing would be the best way to spread his name. After countless months of trying different brands, he just decided to start his own, because God the Father seeks to provide high-quality Christian streetwear apparel for believers and followers of Christ. I want our Christian clothing to spark a conversation. Those are Drew's words, but now these are Andrew's words, saying that I believe in God the apparel, God the Father apparel. It's nice, comfortable. It makes sense. The designs some are kind of big and over the top. Some are really small. There's tie-dye, and there's everything here that you would want in a shop. T-shirts, hoodies, sweatsuits, hats. They have these exclusive bundles that have a variety of different clothes inside. And just go check out all the different designs. Prayer over Panic. If you want a Bible verse, they have different Bible verses for you. As mentioned, there's some tie-dye ones. Some are dark t-shirts, some are different colors, some are brighter colors. If you want a hoodie that just has a small verse on it, it doesn't say the whole verse, so it makes somebody see it and then they gotta look it up later for themselves. So today I've been partnered with God the Father Apparel for a long time, and I invite you to go to the website God the Father Apparel. That's APPAREL Apparel. So it's godthefatherapparel.com/Andrew Lockhart. One more time, that's godthefatherapparel.com/Andrew Lockhart. And shop around. If you find something you like, you know what? I'm even going to give you a further discount when you are in the main menu, or the ordering menu, I should say. Discount code is Lockhart. That's my last name. LOCKHART 15. Lockhart 15, and that's for 15% off. So go today, check out the t-shirt, and start your conversation. Are you a believer in God? Are you a believer in Christ? But you don't know really how to convey it to other people, but you know you should be serving God by spreading His word? Do it through clothes, and do it through cool design clothes at godthefatherapparel.com/Andrew-Lockhart and use the code Lockhart15 for 15% off today. The word is spread and can now be spread through our clothing. godthefatherapparel.com/Andrew-Lockhart.